In this video, we're going to explore how to shade lines, make lines bolder or dotted using the features in the y equals key. Most students go into the y equals key of their calculator and type in an equation, and then when they press graph, they get a line. That's the way most people think the calculator works, don't really give it much more thought. But let's look at what's causing that. Over here at the very far left side of your y equals key, there's a little bitty line. That actually is telling you that when you graph this equation, it's going to graph it as a line. So what we're going to look at is explore changes to this little line over here and see what it does to our graph. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to scroll using my arrow key. I'm going to scroll all the way over to that line, and when it's flashing, then I'm going to press my enter key one time. And when I press my enter key one time, it changes that line to a bold line. Now I'm going to go ahead and just press my graph key and see what the effect of it is. So instead of being that thin line that I'm used to seeing, now I've created a bold line on my graph. This could be useful if I'm wanting to compare this to another line. I could bold this one and keep the other line thin and know which is which. Okay, so now let's look at it. And this time I'm going to press, so I went to my line, I pressed enter one time, it gave me a bold line. The second time I press enter, it takes the bold line and turns it into a shaded triangle above. So everything above that thin little line has now been shaded. Well, that means that everything greater than or equal to my line, wherever it is going to be shaded. So let's look at it on the graph. When I press my graph key, it draws my line just like it was doing, but now it has shaded everything that is greater than or equal to. So the above is the greater than. So continuing along, I had it at greater than, I pressed enter another time, and now it's showing me everything below my little line is being shaded. So that would be my less than or equal to. Everything less than that line is being shaded. So when I press my graph key and look, this time it draws the same line, but this time it's shading everything below it or less than. Now the next one you probably won't use too often, but sometimes you need to compare three lines. So you can, when you're comparing three lines, you could come over and press enter again. So we just finished less than. If we press enter again, it made it a very, very fine dotted line, very lightly dotted. And when I press my graph key, you can see, just barely see that line. Very, very, very finely dotted line. That can be useful if you're going to be graphing more than two lines and want to know which is which. So now let's just look at an application or two of this. So I went into my regular y equals. I'd reset everything so everybody was back to normal lines. And I put in two equations. I put in my negative 4x that we've been working with, and I put in a second equation, just left them as normal lines. Press the graph. I can see from this the intersection. I can work with this as just two regular lines. But what if my equation wanted me to work with inequalities? Well, I could go back and put an inequality, a shading with each one of those lines. And when I press graph, it graphs and shades. So the first line, it shaded everything less than. And then on my second line, it also shaded everything less than. And if I'm looking for the solution to my inequalities, I can easily see it's this double shaded area. Okay, so just looking at a star question that came in I think it was on last year's STAR test. They gave us an equation, and or an inequality, and they wanted to know which one of these guys represented it best. So I just went ahead and said, okay, that's my less than, put it into the calculator, shaded, press the enter key, past the bold, past the greater than to less than, and when I pressed my graph button, it's easy to see. I did want to point this out, and the reason I brought this one up is notice that they've got a solid line here and a dotted line here. This is a limitation that the calculator can't do. The calculator can't say a difference between shading with a dotted line or shading with a solid line. So you can get to the less than shading side, but you're going to have to know the difference between the less than or equal to's, which are solid lines, and the plain old less thans or greater thans, which are dotted lines. So you're still going to have to know the difference because the calculator can't show you that.